I don't even know where to begin, but let me set the stage for you. It all started at a house party last Friday night. My best friend, Derek, had just gotten promoted and decided to throw this huge celebration at his place. Derek's a loud, in-your-face kind of guy, so naturally the party was packed. There were people spilling out onto the lawn. The living room had turned into a makeshift dance floor. And the kitchen? That was ground zero for shots and drunken toasts. I wasn't in the mood to go, honestly. It had been a long week, and Rachel, my wife, had been acting off. But not in the way you might think. She wasn't cold or distant. If anything, she'd been overly sweet lately, bringing me coffee in the mornings, asking about my day like she actually cared, and even texting me little hearts while I was at work. Sounds nice, right? Except it didn't feel real. It felt like someone playing a part, and I couldn't shake the sense that something was off beneath the surface. Rachel insisted we go to the party, though. She'd been hyped about it all week, talking about how it'd be good for us to let loose, and how Derek's wife, Claire, had invited all these interesting people. At the time, I thought she was just trying to cheer me up. Looking back now, I realized she had a very different reason for wanting to be there. The night started out fine. Rachel looked amazing in this tight red dress I hadn't seen her wear in years. She had that kind of confidence that made heads turn when she walked into the room, and I'll admit it, I felt proud to have her by my side. For a while, we mingled together, laughing with friends and sharing drinks. But after about an hour, she slipped away, saying she needed to find Claire. I didn't think much of it at first. Rachel's always been more social than me, and I figured she'd pop up again in a bit. But an hour passed. Then two. I barely saw her the rest of the night. I tried to keep myself distracted, chatting with Derek and a few other friends, but it wasn't easy. Every time I glanced across the room, I caught glimpses of her. Laughing too hard at someone's joke, leaning in a little too close to talk to some guy in a leather jacket. My stomach twisted, but I pushed it down. Told myself I was just being insecure. Then came the moment everything changed. It was around midnight, and I was about to leave. I'd had enough of the noise and the drinking, and honestly, Rachel's absence was eating away at me. I figured I'd find her, let her know I was heading out, and if she wanted to stay, fine. I was halfway to the front door when I heard it. A muffled sound coming from one of the rooms down the hallway. At first, I thought it was just someone drunkenly stumbling around. But as I got closer, I froze. It wasn't stumbling. It was Rachel. I recognized her voice immediately. She was moaning. I stood there for what felt like forever, my brain refusing to process what my ears were telling me. But then I heard a man's voice. Low, smug, and way too familiar. Jake. Jake is one of Derek's friends. The kind of guy who thinks he's God's gift to women. He's good-looking in that greasy, overconfident way, and he always had this annoying habit of flirting with Rachel right in front of me. I never took him seriously, though. I trusted her. Or at least I used to. I should have walked away. I should have turned around, left the party, and dealt with it later. But I didn't. I pushed the door open. And there they were. Rachel was pinned against the wall, her hair a mess, her dress pushed halfway up her thighs. Jake had his hands all over her, and she was letting him. No, more than letting him. She looked like she was enjoying it. For a split second, neither of them noticed me. The music from the party drowned out the sound of the door creaking open, and I stood there, my fists clenched, my vision tunneling. Couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then Jake looked up. His smirk faded instantly, replaced by this deer-in-the-headlights expression. Rachel turned her head, saw me, and froze. "Nate!" she gasped, like she was actually surprised to see me, like she hadn't been doing what she'd just been doing. I didn't say a word. Couldn't. My throat felt like it had been filled with broken glass. Jake backed away, muttering something about how he didn't know I'd be here, like that somehow made it better. Rachel, on the other hand, didn't move. She just stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide, and for the first time in our entire marriage, she looked like a stranger to me. Care to explain? I finally managed to choke out. Her response? It's not what it looks like. I almost laughed. Almost. Because if it wasn't what it looked like, then what the hell was it? The silence that followed her excuse was deafening. Rachel was still standing there, disheveled, with her dress wrinkled and her lipstick smudged. Jake, the coward, muttered something about needing air and bolted past me, leaving her to face the consequences alone. I didn't stop him. He wasn't who I wanted answers from. Rachel reached out like she was going to touch my arm, but I stepped back. "Nate, please," she said, her voice shaky, like she was the victim here. "Can we just talk about this somewhere else? Not here. Not like this." "Talk about what, Rachel?" My voice cracked, half from the lump in my throat and half from rage. "About how you're screwing Derek's friend in the middle of a party. Because, believe me, I'd love to hear your explanation." Her face flushed red. Not with shame, mind you, but anger. She folded her arms like I was the one out of line. "You don't understand." "You're right." I cut her off, my voice rising. "I don't understand. So why don't you help me out? Rachel? Why don't you explain why my wife is moaning in a stranger's arms while I'm standing in the same goddamn house?" I could see people starting to notice us. A few partygoers had wandered into the hallway, their drunken curiosity piqued by my raised voice. Claire appeared from somewhere, her expression shifting from confusion to horror when she realized what was happening. Rachel's eyes darted around, probably calculating how much of a scene I was willing to make. She dropped her voice, her tone turning icy. "Nate, lower your voice. This isn't the place for this." I barked out a bitter laugh. "Oh, now you care about the place? You didn't seem to mind when you were dry-humping Jake 5 minutes ago." She flinched, and for a second I thought maybe she'd own up to it. But no. Rachel being Rachel, she did what she always does. Twisted the situation. "It's not what you think," she hissed, her voice sharp but quiet. "I was drunk, okay? He came on to me, and I wasn't thinking clearly." "Drunk," I repeated, my anger boiling over. "You've had 2 drinks, Rachel. I saw you. Don't insult me by pretending this was an accident." Her face tightened, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was trying to figure out the best way to spin this, to manipulate the situation so she could weasel her way out. And in that moment, I realized something. I wasn't looking at the woman I married. I was looking at someone who had no problem lying to my face, even when the evidence was right in front of me. Claire stepped forward, her voice soft. "Hey, is everything okay? Ask your friend," I said without taking my eyes off Rachel. Claire looked at Rachel, then at me, and something seemed to click. Her mouth opened, but Rachel cut her off before she could speak. "Don't," Rachel snapped at her. Then she turned back to me, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Nate, can we please talk about this at home? You're making a scene." "I'm making a scene?" I said, taking a step closer to her. My voice dropped, low and dangerous. "You're the one who made this mess, Rachel. You're the one who decided to cheat on me with Jake of all people. Don't you dare put this on me." The crowd in the hallway was growing, and I could feel the tension building. People were whispering, pointing, their faces a mix of confusion and pity. Rachel must have felt it too because she suddenly grabbed my arm. "Fine," she said through gritted teeth. "Let's go." But I didn't move. "No," I said flatly. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Her eyes widened, and for a brief second, I saw a flicker of panic. She wasn't used to me standing my ground like this. I'd always been the calm one, the peacemaker. But not tonight. Not after this. "Don't do this," she whispered, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "Please, let's just leave and talk about this later. You're blowing it out of proportion." That was it. That was the moment I snapped. "Blowing it out of proportion?" I repeated, my voice rising again. "Rachel, I just caught you cheating on me. In public. And you want to act like I'm overreacting? Are you serious right now?" The crowd gasped audibly at the word cheating, and I saw Derek pushing his way through the throng of people. His face was a storm cloud. "What the hell is going on?" he demanded. I didn't answer. I couldn't tear my eyes away from Rachel, who was now glaring at me like I was the bad guy in all of this. "You know what?" I said, my voice suddenly calm. Too calm. "You want to leave? Fine. Go ahead. But you're going alone." I turned and started walking away, pushing past Derek and the stunned onlookers. Behind me, I heard Rachel call my name, but I didn't stop. Not this time. I made it as far as Derek's front yard before my legs finally gave out. I sat down on the curb, my head in my hands, my heart pounding like I'd just run a marathon. The weight of what had just happened hit me all at once. 10 years. 10 years of memories, of laughter, of thinking we were building something real, gone. Just like that. And the worst part? I didn't even know why. I stayed there for a long time, staring at the ground, trying to make sense of it all. People started trickling out of the party, throwing me awkward glances as they passed. No one stopped to ask if I was okay. Not that I would have known what to say if they had. Eventually, Derek came out, his face grim. He sat down next to me without a word, handing me a bottle of water. "She's still inside," he said after a while. "She's trying to spin it, saying you misunderstood." I snorted. "Of course she is." We sat there in silence for a bit, before he finally asked, "What are you going to do?" I didn't answer right away, because the truth was I didn't know. All I knew was that everything had changed, and there was no going back. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the empty streets until I ended up at a 24-hour diner. You know the kind of place. Cheap coffee, sticky booths, and a waitress who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. I sat in the corner, staring at the menu without really reading it. My brain was on fire, replaying the night's events over and over like a broken record. Rachel's face, her voice, the sound of her moaning in that room. It wouldn't stop. Eventually, the waitress came over, snapping her gum. "You gonna order, hun?" I shook my head. "Just coffee." She poured me a cup and left without another word. I just sat there, staring into the black liquid, trying to figure out what the hell I was supposed to do next. Divorce? Separation? Confront her again? All the options felt wrong. I was angry, but underneath that, there was something worse. This crushing, hollow sadness I couldn't shake. 10 years. 10 years of my life, and now I was here, drinking terrible coffee at 2 a.m. in a place that smelled like burnt bacon and regret. Around 3 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was Rachel. She texted me 5 times already, each message more desperate than the last. "Nate, where are you? We need to talk. I know you're upset, but I can explain. Please come home. Don't do this. You're being dramatic. Can you just grow up and talk to me?" I stared at the last one, my jaw tightening. Grow up? Was she serious? She was the one who had thrown a grenade into our marriage, and now I was the one who needed to grow up? The audacity of it almost made me laugh. The texts didn't stop. A few minutes later, my phone rang. "Rachel." I let it buzz until it stopped, then set my phone down on the table like it might bite me. A minute later, Derek called. I picked up this time. "What?" I asked, my voice flat. "Where are you?" he asked. His voice was calmer than I expected, but I could tell he was treading carefully. "Rachel's been calling me non-stop, asking if I've seen you." "Let her call," I said. "I'm not going home tonight." "Yeah, I figured." "Listen." He hesitated, like he wasn't sure how to say what he wanted to say. She's not taking this well, man. She's telling people it's not what it looked like, that Jake got too drunk and came on to her." I almost dropped the phone. "She's what?" "I know. I don't believe it either, but she's trying to save face. She told Claire that you misinterpreted the situation, that you've been distant lately and insecure." "Insecure?" I said, my voice rising. "She's really trying to blame me for this?" "I'm just telling you what she's saying," Derek replied. "Jake's gone, by the way. He slipped out right after you left." "Coward." "Of course he did," I muttered, running a hand through my hair. "What about Claire? Does she believe her?" There was a pause. "Claire's torn," Derek admitted. "She says Rachel's been acting weird for weeks, but she doesn't want to jump to conclusions. She's trying to stay neutral." Neutral? What a joke. The truth was right there, plain as day, and people were still willing to give Rachel the benefit of the doubt. It made me sick. "I need time," I finally said. "I can't go back there right now." Derek didn't push me. "All right, man. Just don't do anything stupid. Okay? Let me know if you need anything." After we hung up, I sat there for a long time, letting the anger simmer under my skin. Rachel wasn't just a liar. She was a good liar. She didn't just cheat on me. She was already working on a story to make me the bad guy. That wasn't carelessness. That was calculated. I stayed at the diner until the sun started to rise. The coffee had gone cold, and the waitress had stopped checking on me. Eventually, I left a few crumpled bills on the table and walked out into the cold morning air. I couldn't avoid her forever. As much as I wanted to disappear, I knew I had to face her eventually. So I drove back home, bracing myself for the explosion I knew was waiting for me. When I walked through the door, Rachel was sitting on the couch, still in her red dress from the night before. She looked like she hadn't slept. Her hair was a mess, and her makeup was smeared. But the moment she saw me, she stood up, her face a mix of relief and anger. "Where the hell have you been?" she demanded. "Do you know how worried I've been?" I closed the door behind me, leaning against it for a moment. "Don't," I said quietly. "Don't what?" she snapped, throwing her arms up. "You stormed out of the party, embarrassed me in front of everyone, and now you won't even talk to me? Do you have any idea how hard this has been for me?" "For you," I repeated, my voice rising. "Are you serious right now, Rachel? You got caught cheating on me, and somehow you're the victim." "I wasn't cheating," she shouted back. "How many times do I have to say it? Jake came on to me. I didn't." "Stop lying." I cut her off, stepping closer. "I saw you, Rachel. I saw everything. Don't insult me by pretending it didn't happen." Her mouth snapped shut, and for a second, I thought she might finally admit it. But then her expression hardened, her eyes narrowing into something cold and sharp. "You're impossible," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You've been distant for months, Nate. You barely look at me anymore, let alone touch me. Do you have any idea how lonely I've been? And then you act all shocked when someone else gives me attention? Maybe if you'd been a better husband." That was it. That was the breaking point. I didn't let her finish. "Don't you dare try to pin this on me," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "Don't you dare. I've been here, Rachel. I've always been here. But you're a liar, a cheater. And now you're trying to rewrite the story to make yourself look like the victim. Well, guess what? I'm not buying it. Not anymore." Her face twisted into something ugly, and for the first time, I saw her for what she really was. Not the woman I fell in love with, but someone who would do whatever it took to protect herself, no matter who she hurt in the process. "You're pathetic," she spat, her voice low and venomous. "You can't even handle one mistake. Maybe you're not as strong as you think you are." I took a step back, her words hitting me like a slap to the face. I felt the anger drain out of me, replaced by something colder, something final. "You're right," I said quietly. "I can't handle this. I can't handle you." And with that, I turned and walked upstairs, leaving her standing there in the living room. I didn't know where we were going from here, but one thing was certain. The person I thought I knew, the person I'd built my life with, was gone. And I wasn't sure I'd ever be able to find her again. The house was eerily quiet the next morning. It wasn't the kind of peaceful silence you appreciate, though. It was heavy, suffocating. I woke up on the guest room bed, still in my clothes from the night before, the ache in my chest pulling me out of sleep before the sun was fully up. I stared at the ceiling for what felt like hours, going over every word Rachel and I had exchanged. Her insults, her excuses, the way she'd flipped the blame onto me so effortlessly. When I finally dragged myself downstairs, Rachel was already up. She was in the kitchen, making coffee, like it was just another morning. She looked completely unbothered, humming softly as if the night before hadn't completely blown up our lives. The sight of her standing there, acting normal, made my stomach churn. She turned when she heard me enter, her expression unreadable. For a second, we just stared at each other. I wondered if she felt even an ounce of guilt. But then she broke the silence with a tone so casual it made my blood boil. "You want coffee?" she asked, like she hadn't gutted me 12 hours earlier. I ignored the question. "We need to talk," I said, my voice flat. She sighed, setting her mug down. "Nate, I'm not doing this again. I told you last night it wasn't what it looked like. I don't know what else you want me to say." "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't give me that line again. I'm done playing this game. You want to save whatever's left of this marriage? Then stop lying to my face and tell me the truth." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might crack. But instead, she folded her arms across her chest, her eyes narrowing. Fine. You want the truth? Here it is. I've been miserable, Nate. For months. Maybe even longer. Miserable, I repeated, my voice rising. And what, that's my fault? So miserable that you had to hook up with Jake at a party? That's your solution? Her lip curled into a sneer. It's not like you've been around much to notice, is it? You bury yourself in work, you come home late, you're always tired, and then you act surprised when I start feeling neglected. That word, neglected, hit me like a freight train. It was such a clinical, calculated way of framing what she'd done. Like I was the one who'd pushed her into Jake's arms. Don't twist this, I snapped, taking a step closer. You made a choice, Rachel. You decided that instead of talking to me, instead of telling me how you felt, you'd betray me. And now you're standing here, trying to rewrite the story like it's my fault. Her face hardened, and for the first time I saw the mask slip. The Rachel I thought I knew, the one who used to smile at me like I was her whole world, was gone. In her place was someone colder, crueler. Do you even hear yourself? She said, her voice dripping with disdain. You're so high and mighty, Nate, so righteous, like you've never made a mistake in your life. But newsflash, this marriage didn't fall apart overnight. You let it die long before Jake ever came into the picture. I stared at her, stunned. I'd prepared myself for lies, for excuses, even for a tearful apology I wouldn't believe. But this was something else. This was her rewriting history, burning everything we'd built together to the ground and blaming me for handing her the matches. Unbelievable, I muttered, running a hand through my hair. You really don't feel guilty at all, do you? She rolled her eyes. Oh, please, I'm not the only one at fault here. You're not exactly husband of the year, Nate. Maybe if you spent less time at work and more time paying attention to your wife, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I felt the words catch in my throat, but I refused to let her see me break. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction. You know what? I'm done. I'm not standing here, letting you twist the knife any further. I turned to leave, but her voice stopped me cold. Nate, she said, and for the first time, her tone wasn't angry or defensive. It was calm, calculating. If you walk away from this, we're done. And I'm not just talking about us. I'll make sure you regret it. I froze, my hand on the banister. Slowly, I turned back to face her. What the hell is that supposed to mean? She shrugged, leaning against the counter like she had all the time in the world. It means you don't want to make me your enemy. You think I won't fight back if you try to leave? Go ahead, Nate. Try. I'll take everything. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Rachel had always been strong-willed. But this was pure venom. It wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. And the way she said it, so calm and sure of herself, sent a chill down my spine. You're unbelievable, I said, shaking my head. You're seriously going to try to blackmail me now? After everything you've done? She didn't answer. She just picked up her coffee cup, took a slow sip, and smiled. And that's when it hit me. Rachel wasn't sorry. She wasn't ashamed. She didn't even see what she'd done as wrong. She'd already moved past it, already shifted the blame onto me, and now she was gearing up for a fight I didn't even know I was in yet. I left the kitchen without another word. My hands were shaking as I climbed the stairs, my heart pounding like a war drum. I needed to think, to figure out what my next move was. When I got to the bedroom, I grabbed my laptop and started searching for divorce lawyers. I wasn't ready to pull the trigger yet. I wasn't even sure what I wanted to do, but I needed to be prepared. Rachel might have been playing a game, but I wasn't about to sit back and let her win. As I sat there, staring at the list of lawyers on the screen, my phone buzzed again. Another text from Rachel. I hope you're ready for the consequences if you decide to leave. I read the message twice, my stomach twisting into knots. The woman I married was gone. In her place was someone who wouldn't just cheat and lie. She'd destroy everything in her path to protect herself. And if I wasn't careful, I'd be next. The next few days were a delicate balancing act, like walking a tightrope over a pit filled with broken glass. Rachel and I barely spoke. The house was unnervingly quiet, save for the sound of her passive-aggressive sighs every time I walked past her. She didn't press me again, not outright, but I could feel her watching me, calculating. It wasn't a truce, it was the pause before the next shot was fired. Meanwhile, I started making moves. Quietly, carefully. I wasn't going to let her catch me off guard. First, I called Derek. I needed someone on the ground who could keep tabs on Jake and confirm my suspicions. I trusted Derek, and even though this whole mess was putting him in an awkward position, Jake being his friend and all, I knew he hated what had happened as much as I did. When he picked up, his voice was hesitant. "Nate, man, how are you holding up?" "Not great," I admitted. "But I need a favor." There was a pause. "If this is about Jake." "It is," I interrupted. "I need to know if he's still talking to Rachel, if she's trying to cover her tracks with him or, I don't know, spin another lie. Can you keep your ear to the ground? See if he says anything to anyone."
Derek sighed.
"Yeah, I can do that. But Nate, you should know, Jake's already been bragging." I gripped the phone tighter. "Bragging? Not at the party, but afterward. I heard from a mutual friend that he's been telling people about hooking up with a married woman. He didn't name names, but it doesn't take a genius to connect the dots." The anger I'd been holding at bay roared to life again. I wanted to find Jake, to confront him, to punch his smug face into the ground. But I knew that wouldn't solve anything. Jake wasn't the real issue here, Rachel was. "Thanks, Derek," I said, my voice tight. "Let me know if you hear anything else." "Will do. And Nate, be careful, man. Rachel's not the type to back down easily." I hung up, Derek's warning ringing in my ears. That night, Rachel tried a different tactic. She made dinner, spaghetti, my favorite, and set the table like it was some kind of date night. Candles, wine, the whole deal. I walked into the kitchen and stopped dead in my tracks. The smell of garlic and marinara sauce hitting me like a punch to the gut. "What is this?" I asked, my tone flat. She turned from the stove, a practiced smile on her face. "I thought we could have a nice dinner, talk things through, like adults." I wanted to laugh, but it came out as a scoff instead. "Talk things through? Now you want to talk?" Her smile faltered, but she recovered quickly. "Look, I know I messed up. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But, Nate, we've been together for 10 years. Doesn't that count for something? Doesn't that mean we're worth fighting for?" The way she said it, so calm and measured, made me want to believe her. For a moment, I almost did. But then I remembered her words from a few nights ago. "Maybe if you'd been a better husband." And the fury bubbled up again. "Worth fighting for?" I repeated, my voice cold. "You mean like how you fought for us at the party? In that room? With Jake?" She flinched, but her face quickly hardened. "I already told you, that wasn't what it looked like. And I already told you I don't believe you," I shot back. She set the spoon down with a loud clink and crossed her arms. "Fine. You don't believe me? Then what's the point, Nate? Are you just gonna hold this over my head forever? What do you want me to do? Beg?" The audacity of her tone, like I was the one being unreasonable, tipped me over the edge. "What do I want?" I snapped, taking a step closer. "I want you to take responsibility for what you did. I want you to stop lying, stop manipulating, and stop pretending that this is somehow my fault. But you can't, can you? Because that would mean admitting you're not the perfect wife you pretend to be." Her eyes flashed with anger, and for a moment, I thought she might finally explode. But instead, she turned away, grabbing the wine bottle off the counter and pouring herself a glass. "You're impossible," she muttered, more to herself than to me. "Yeah," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Well, I learned from the best." She didn't respond. She just sipped her wine, her eyes staring straight ahead like I wasn't even there. I left the kitchen and went upstairs, slamming the door to the guest room behind me. My hands were shaking, my heart racing. The anger was so overwhelming it was almost physical, like a weight pressing down on my chest. But beneath the anger was something worse. A hollow ache, a sickening sense of betrayal that no amount of yelling could fix. I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to give. The next morning, I took another step. I called a divorce lawyer. Her name was Jennifer, and she came highly recommended by a colleague at work who'd gone through a messy split last year. When I explained the situation, she didn't seem surprised. "Unfortunately, I've seen this kind of behavior before," she said, her tone professional but sympathetic. Cheaters who refuse to take responsibility often double down, especially when they feel cornered. They'll blame the spouse, rewrite history, even try to turn friends and family against you. That's exactly what she's doing, I said, pacing my office. She's already trying to make me out to be the bad guy. She's been telling people I've been distant and that I overreacted at the party. Jennifer sighed. That's standard. It's called Darvo, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. She's trying to make herself the victim and paint you as the aggressor. It's a classic tactic. I stopped pacing, the weight of her words settling on me. Darvo. There was a word for what Rachel was doing, a playbook she was following. What do? I asked. For now, gather evidence, Jennifer said. Document everything. Texts, emails, anything that shows her behavior. And don't confront her anymore. It'll only give her more ammunition to use against you later. It wasn't what I wanted to hear. I wanted to do something, to fight back, to make her face the consequences of what she'd done. But Jennifer was right. This wasn't just a marriage falling apart anymore. This was a battle. And if I wanted to come out of it with any semblance of my life intact, I had to be smart. That night, Rachel tried again. She knocked on the guest room door, her voice soft and hesitant. Nate, can we talk? I didn't answer. Couldn't. Because the truth was, I didn't trust myself to stay calm anymore. After a few moments, I heard her sigh. Fine, be that way. But this isn't over. Her footsteps retreated down the hall, and I felt a chill run through me. She was right. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. That I didn't hear from Rachel the entire next day, and for a brief moment, I let myself believe that she'd finally given up. Given up on pretending, on spinning lies, on trying to control the narrative. I worked from home, kept my head down, and focused on the logistics of what was coming next. But deep down, I knew Rachel wasn't the type to just let things go. And sure enough, when I came downstairs that evening, she was waiting for me in the living room. She wasn't pacing or fuming like I'd half expected. No, she was sitting calmly on the couch, her legs crossed, a glass of red wine in her hand. It was the calm that scared me most. We need to talk, she said, her voice steady. I almost laughed. You mean like we've been trying to talk for the past few days? Pretty sure we've covered all the bases, Rachel. No, we haven't, she said, setting the wine glass down on the coffee table with an eerie sense of precision. You've been shutting me out, running away, refusing to have a real conversation. But you need to hear what I have to say. It's important. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Fine, go ahead. Let's hear it. She took a deep breath, and for a second, I thought she might actually apologize, might finally admit to what she'd done. But then she looked up at me, her eyes sharp and calculating, and I knew whatever she was about to say wasn't for my benefit. It was for hers. I've been thinking, she started, her tone carefully measured. And I realized that maybe we both made mistakes in this marriage. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, waiting for the trap. I'm not saying I'm perfect, she continued, her voice softening just enough to sound sincere. But neither are you, Nate. And I think deep down you know that. I felt so alone for so long. You've been distant, unavailable, and honestly neglectful. And when I tried to talk to you about it, you brushed me off. There it was. The blame. The Darvo. I took a slow, steadying breath. So, let me get this straight. You're saying that because I worked long hours to keep this house running, because I didn't spend enough time stroking your ego, you felt justified in what you did? That's your argument. Her lips tightened, just for a second, before she replaced the expression with something more vulnerable. It was almost impressive how quickly she could shift gears. I'm not saying it was justified. I'm saying I was vulnerable, and Jake took advantage of that. I barked out a bitter laugh. Vulnerable? Rachel, I walked in on you with him. You didn't look very vulnerable to me. She flinched, but only slightly. I made a mistake, she said, her voice quiet. A terrible mistake. But I don't want to throw away everything we've built because of one moment of weakness. And there it was again, that expertly crafted tone, equal parts regret and resolve, designed to make me question myself. To make me think maybe, just maybe, I was overreacting. But I wasn't falling for it. Not this time. Let me ask you something, I said, stepping into the room. If I hadn't walked in that night, would you have told me? Or would you have let me keep living in the dark while you carried on your little game? Her eyes flickered, just for a moment, but it was enough. She hesitated too long, and the truth was written all over her face. That's what I thought, I said, my voice cold. Her mask slipped then, just a little. You're not being fair, she said, her tone sharper now. I'm trying to fix this, and you're just... Fix this? I interrupted, my voice rising. You think you can fix this by rewriting history? By blaming me? Rachel, I don't even know who you are anymore. Her face hardened, and I saw the flash of anger in her eyes. The vulnerable act was gone, replaced by something colder. Fine, she said, her voice clipped. If you're so determined to play the victim, then maybe we can't fix this. But don't think for a second that you're going to walk away from this unscathed. I stared at her, stunned by the venom in her tone. Is that a threat? It's reality, she said, standing up. You think divorcing me will be easy? Go ahead, Nate. Try. But when this is all over, you'll wish you had just let it go. She brushed past me on her way out of the room, and as she did, she muttered something under her breath. I didn't catch all of it, but I heard enough. Pathetic. I stood there for a long time after she left, my fists clenched at my sides, my mind racing. She wasn't just fighting to save herself. She was preparing for war. The next morning, I got my first taste of what Rachel had in store for me. It started with a text from Claire. Hey, can we talk? Rachel told me some things, and I just want to get your side of the story. I called her immediately. What did she say? I asked, skipping the pleasantries. Claire hesitated. She said you've been emotionally distant for a long time, that you've been working crazy hours and neglecting her needs. She also said you've been controlling, that you don't trust her and you've been tracking her location on your phone. I nearly dropped the phone. Tracking her location? What the hell is she talking about? She said you've been paranoid and jealous, Claire continued, her voice uneasy. She said you've been accusing her of things for months, and that the whole thing with Jake was blown out of proportion because of your insecurities. Insecurities? I repeated, my voice shaking with anger. Claire, you were at the party. You saw what happened. Do you really believe that? Claire sighed. I don't know what to believe, Nate. I've known Rachel for years, and she's always been so put together. This just doesn't make sense. Put together. Of course. Rachel had always been good at curating her image, at making people believe she was the perfect wife, the perfect friend, the perfect everything. And now she was using that image to paint me as the villain. Look, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Rachel's lying. She's trying to cover her tracks and make me the bad guy. I don't know why you're even entertaining this. I don't want to take sides, Claire said, and I could hear the hesitation in her voice. Well, by not taking sides, you already have, I said, and before she could respond, I hung up. Rachel wasn't just rewriting history. She was building an entire narrative where I was the villain and she was the victim. And if I wasn't careful, she was going to make sure everyone believed her version of the story. It wasn't just a divorce anymore. It was a battle for the truth. And I wasn't about to lose. Rachel didn't waste any time. Over the next few days, I started hearing from mutual friends, people I hadn't even spoken to in months, who suddenly felt compelled to check in. The calls and texts followed the same script. Concern, confusion, and then the inevitable, Rachel mentioned you've been going through a rough patch. Is everything okay? She was planting seeds, and I could feel the roots spreading faster than I could control. Rachel had always been charming, persuasive. People liked her. She knew exactly how to frame a story to get people on her side without ever outright accusing me of anything. The worst part? She was careful, surgical. There wasn't enough in her comments for me to call her out without sounding paranoid. But it was enough to make people doubt me. I'd never felt so isolated. The one person I thought I could count on was Derek. He'd always had my back, and as far as I knew, he hated Jake almost as much as I did. But even he wasn't immune to Rachel's influence. When we met for drinks after work one evening, he looked uncomfortable, shifting in his seat like he didn't want to be there. Spit it out, I said, taking a sip of my beer. Derek sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Look, man, I've been hearing things. Rachel's been talking to Claire, and Claire's been, well, She's been saying some stuff that's hard to ignore. Like what? I asked, already bracing myself. Derek hesitated, then leaned in, lowering his voice like we were conspirators in some shady deal. She said Rachel's been telling people you've been controlling, that you don't let her have a social life, that you're obsessive, tracking her phone, accusing her of things out of nowhere. She's even implying you might have had someone follow her once. Is any of this true? I blinked at him, stunned. Follow her? Are you kidding me? Of course it's not true. I didn't think so, Derek said quickly, holding up his hands. I had to ask. You know how Rachel can be. She's convincing, man. And Claire's eating it up. She's even told some of the other girls in the group that you're, unstable. Unstable. That word hung in the air between us like smoke. She's painting me as some kind of psycho, I said, my voice low. She cheats on me, and now I'm the bad guy? How does that even make sense? Derek shook his head, leaning back in his chair. It doesn't, but Rachel's good at making people see what she wants them to see. You know that. Do you believe her? I asked, staring him down. No, he said firmly. I was there, remember? I saw the look on your face when you walked out of that room. You don't fake something like that. And Jake? He's not exactly denying what happened. But what? Rachel's been playing this smart. She's not outright denying the affair. She's framing it as a misunderstanding. Like maybe Jake came on to her and you overreacted. She's planting doubt, Nate. Enough doubt that people don't know who to believe. I clenched my fists under the table. I could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. She's turning this into a goddamn PR campaign, I muttered. Derek nodded grimly. Pretty much. You're gonna have to be careful, man. She's not just trying to save her own ass. She's setting the stage for the divorce. If she gets enough people on her side, it won't matter what really happened. Perception is everything. I sat back, staring at my beer, my mind racing. Rachel wasn't just fighting dirty. She was playing the long game. She didn't just want to win. She wanted to burn me to the ground in the process. But the thing about Rachel, she was good at lying, but she wasn't perfect. She'd slip up eventually, and when she did, I'd be ready. That slip came sooner than I expected. 2 nights later, I was sitting in the guest room, scrolling through old photos on my phone. I don't even know why I was doing it. Maybe some masochistic part of me wanted to remember what it felt like to love her. But as I flipped through the pictures, I stumbled across something I hadn't seen before. A screenshot of a text conversation. It wasn't mine. The image was blurry, like it had been taken in a rush, but I could still make out the messages. It was a conversation between Rachel and someone listed in her phone as J. Tonight. Rachel, not sure. Nate's been suspicious. I'll let you know. J. Don't keep me waiting, winky face. Rachel, you'll survive. Be patient. My heart stopped. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't something innocent I'd misinterpreted. It was proof. Concrete, undeniable proof that Rachel had been sneaking around with Jake, and that she'd been lying to my face the entire time. But the question was, how did I get this screenshot? I didn't take it, and Rachel sure as hell wouldn't have sent it to me. I stared at the image for a long time, my mind racing. Then it hit me. Claire. Claire and Rachel had been close, but they'd had their share of spats over the years. And if anyone had access to Rachel's phone, even for a few seconds, it was Claire. She must have taken the screenshot and sent it to me without saying anything, either out of guilt or some twisted sense of loyalty to both sides. I didn't know her motivations, and I didn't care. All I cared about was the truth staring back at me from my phone screen. I saved the image to a secure folder, then sent it to my email for good measure. This was my ace, my leverage, and if Rachel thought she could spin this story to her advantage, she was in for a rude awakening. The next morning, Rachel tried again to play the perfect wife. She greeted me in the kitchen with a bright smile, a cup of coffee already waiting for me on the counter. Good morning, she chirped, her tone unnervingly cheerful. I didn't respond. I just stared at her, my expression unreadable. What's wrong? She asked, tilting her head like she was genuinely concerned. I took a sip of the coffee, set the mug down, and leaned against the counter. You're really committed to this act, aren't you? Her smile faltered. What are you talking about? I pulled out my phone, opened the screenshot, and slid it across the counter to her. Her face went pale. Care to explain? I asked, my voice icy. She stared at the screen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. For the first time in days, she looked genuinely caught off guard. I don't know where you got this, she stammered, her voice shaking. Oh, I think you do, I said, crossing my arms. And before you try to spin another lie, let me make one thing clear. I'm done playing games, Rachel. You wanted a war? You've got one. For the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Real fear. And for the first time, I felt like I might actually win. That's when she whispered something I didn't expect. You have no idea what you've just done. Her voice wasn't shaken anymore. It was low, cold, and it sent a chill down my spine. Rachel stood there, gripping the edge of the counter, her face drained of color but her eyes burning with something I couldn't quite place. Fear, yes, but also anger. Calculation. I'd seen her pull herself together like this before. Rachel wasn't the type to let the truth unravel her. She was the type to twist it into something useful. And now, I was starting to realize just how dangerous that could be. You don't want to do this, she said finally, her voice low and deliberate. Do what? I shot back. Confront you? Stand up for myself? Or are you afraid that someone else might finally see through the lies? She shook her head slowly, a humorless smile tugging at her lips. No, Nate. I'm afraid you're about to make this worse for yourself. I laughed bitterly. Worse? Are you kidding me? You've already lied to our friends, blamed me for your cheating, and painted me as some controlling monster. What's left? Are you going to tell people I'm secretly an alien? Go ahead, Rachel, let's hear it. What's your next move? She didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked up her phone from the counter and started typing something. The deliberate movements of her fingers sent a ripple of unease through me. She wasn't flustered anymore. She was in control. I stepped closer, my voice sharp. What are you doing? She glanced up, her expression calm but cold. Just taking precautions. What the hell does that mean? She didn't respond. She finished typing, locked her phone, and set it down on the counter. Then she leaned back against the kitchen island, arms folded, watching me like I was a puzzle she was figuring out how to solve. You think you've won, don't you? She said, her tone almost mocking. You found a screenshot and now you think you're holding all the cards. But here's the thing, Nate. This isn't about who's right or wrong. It's about who people believe. And so far, you're not exactly winning that battle. My jaw clenched. People are smarter than you think, Rachel. You can't fool everyone forever. Maybe not forever, she admitted with a shrug. But I don't need forever. I just need long enough to make sure you're the one who comes out of this looking like the villain. The weight of her words hit me like a brick. She wasn't just trying to defend herself anymore. She was building a narrative, one designed to destroy me before I even had a chance to defend myself. What did you just send? I demanded, my voice rising. She smirked. Wouldn't you like to know? I snatched her phone off the counter, my hands shaking. But of course, it was locked. She didn't even flinch. You're not going to find anything on there, she said lightly. I'm not stupid, Nate. I've been covering my tracks since this whole thing started. My head was spinning. This wasn't a fight anymore. It was a chess game and she was already 5 moves ahead. Couldn't let her rattle me. I've got the truth on my side, I said, forcing myself to sound confident. And I've got proof. That screenshot is just the beginning. Do you really think your little stories are going to hold up when people see the receipts? Her expression darkened, her smirk fading. Proof doesn't matter as much as you think it does. People believe what they want to believe, and I've already given them a story that makes sense. You, on the other hand, she tilted her head, her eyes narrowing. You're just a guy with anger issues and a vendetta. I felt like the floor was tilting beneath me. You're insane, I said quietly. No, she replied, stepping closer. I'm practical. I know how the world works. People don't care about facts. They care about the story that makes them feel good about themselves. And right now, my story is a lot more appealing than yours. I stared at her, searching for some hint of the woman I used to know, the woman I'd spent a decade of my life with, but she was gone. Or maybe she'd never been there at all. You're playing with fire, I said, my voice low. Maybe, she said, picking up her wine glass again. But I've always liked the heat. That night, I got the first taste of what she'd meant by precautions. Around 10 p.m., my phone buzzed with a text from Claire. Hey Nate, I don't know how to say this, but Rachel told me she's scared of you. She said you've been acting erratic, and she's worried about what you might do. Is everything okay? My stomach dropped. Rachel wasn't just telling people I was unstable. She was laying the groundwork to make it look like I was dangerous. I typed out a response, my hands trembling with anger. Claire, this is insane. She's lying. You know me. You've known me for years. Do I seem like the kind of person who would hurt anyone? Her reply came quickly. I don't think you'd hurt anyone, but Rachel says you've been following her and checking her phone. She showed me some messages you sent. They seemed intense. Messages? What messages? I scrolled through our text history, my heart pounding, but there was nothing in there that could be taken out of context. Nothing that could be used against me, which meant she was faking them. I sat there staring at my phone, a cold, heavy weight settling in my chest. This wasn't just a smear campaign anymore. This was Rachel actively trying to paint me as a threat, a ticking time bomb. I called Derek, my voice barely steady. She's trying to set me up, I said the moment he picked up. What do you mean? She's telling people I'm dangerous, that I've been following her, tracking her phone, sending her intense messages. None of it's true, but she's already got Claire buying into it. What if she goes to the cops next? What if she tries to get a restraining order? Derek swore under his breath. Jesus, Nate, that's next level. She's creating a narrative where I'm the bad guy, I said, pacing the guest room. And if she gets enough people to believe it, I don't know how I'm supposed to fight back. Derek was silent for a moment. Then he said, you need to talk to a lawyer, like tomorrow. You can't let this spiral any further. I already have a lawyer, I said, running a hand through my hair. But what am I supposed to do? How do I prove I'm not doing the things she's accusing me of? Start documenting everything, Derek said firmly. Keep records of every interaction you have with her. Every text, every call. And don't let her bait you into an argument. You know she'll twist it against you. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. Yeah, you're right. I trailed off, my voice cracking slightly. I don't even recognize her anymore, Derek. I don't know how it came to this. I know, man, he said quietly. But you can't let her win. Not like this. When I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, the weight of everything pressing down on me. Rachel had turned into someone I didn't know, someone capable of lying, manipulating, and destroying without a second thought. And the worst part? She was winning. For now, I didn't sleep that night. Not a single second. I sat in the guest room with my phone in one hand and my laptop in the other, trying to figure out how to get ahead of Rachel's twisted game. If she wanted a war, then fine, I'd fight. But I wasn't going to let her drag me down with her lies. By the time the sun started peeking through the curtains, I'd come up with a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was all I had. I needed to take Rachel's story apart piece by piece, find the cracks, expose the lies, and make sure everyone could see who she really was. The first thing I did was call Jennifer, my divorce lawyer. When I told her about Rachel's latest accusations, her claims that I'd been stalking her and sending intense messages, Jennifer didn't sound surprised. This is classic preemptive positioning, she said. She's building a case to paint herself as the victim in the divorce. If she can convince people that you're a threat, she might even try to file a restraining order. That would give her the upper hand when it comes to dividing assets or even controlling the narrative in court. The thought of Rachel filing a restraining order against me, a move that would essentially brand me as the aggressor, made my stomach turn. So what do? I asked. Start documenting everything, Jennifer said firmly. Every interaction, every conversation, every move she makes. And if you can get proof that she's lying, hard evidence, you need to gather it now. The more you can show her inconsistencies, the stronger your case will be. I have a screenshot, I said quickly. A text conversation between her and Jake. It proves she was planning to meet him behind my back. That's a good start, Jennifer said. But you'll need more. The goal isn't just to prove the affair. It's to prove that she's manipulating the situation to make you look bad. I hung up the phone feeling both determined and sick to my stomach. This wasn't just a divorce anymore. It was a full-scale battle for control, and Rachel was already 3 steps ahead. But she wasn't untouchable. Nobody is. The first crack in Rachel's story came later that afternoon. Derek called me out of the blue, his voice tense. "Nate, you're not going to believe this," he said. "What now?" I asked, already bracing myself. "It's Jake," he said. "He's been bragging again. Apparently, he got drunk last night and told one of the guys that Rachel's been helping him cover his tracks." My heart skipped a beat. What does that mean? It means Rachel's not just spinning stories to save herself. She's actively working with Jake to make sure neither of them takes the fall. He said she's been texting him, making sure their stories line up. Apparently, she even told him to stay out of town for a while, just to avoid stirring the pot. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. "Are you serious? Do you have proof?" "Not yet," Derek admitted. "But I'm working on it. I know the guy Jake was talking to. He owes me a favor. I'll see if I can get him to spill." "Do it," I said through clenched teeth. "And Derek, thanks." "Don't thank me yet," he said grimly. "This isn't over." That evening, I decided to test the waters. If Rachel was working with Jake to coordinate their lies, then I needed to see how far she was willing to go. When she came home from running errands, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open, pretending to work. She walked in with a shopping bag in one hand and her phone in the other, her face calm and composed as ever. "Long day?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. She glanced at me, clearly surprised by my sudden civility. "Not really," she said. "Just needed some fresh air." I nodded, pretending to be disinterested. "Ran into Derek earlier," I said casually. "He mentioned something interesting." Her posture stiffened ever so slightly. "Oh? What's that?" "Just something about Jake," I said, watching her closely. "Apparently, he's been talking to some of the guys about what happened at the party." "You wouldn't know anything about that, would you?" Her eyes flickered, just for a second, before she forced a laugh. "I haven't talked to Jake since the party," she said, her tone light. "Why would I?" I leaned back in my chair, my heart pounding. "I don't know. Maybe to make sure your stories match up." Her smile faltered. "What are you talking about?" I didn't answer. I just stared at her, letting the silence stretch between us. And for the first time, I saw something crack in her perfect facade. It wasn't much, just a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes, but it was enough to tell me I was on the right track. "You're paranoid," she said finally, her voice tight. "This is exactly what I was talking about. You twist everything into some kind of conspiracy." No wonder I felt so suffocated. I stood up, my hands trembling with restrained anger. "You can lie to everyone else, Rachel, but you can't lie to me. I know who you are. And sooner or later, everyone else is going to know, too." She didn't respond. She just stared at me, her jaw clenched, as I walked past her and out of the room. That night, Derek came through. He called me around midnight, his voice urgent. "Nate, I got it," he said. "Got what?" I asked, sitting up in bed. "The proof. My buddy overheard Jake talking about Rachel again, and this time he recorded it. I've got the audio file." My heart was racing. "What did he say?" "Jake basically admitted that Rachel told him to lay low and not talk to anyone about the party. He even said she helped him come up with an excuse in case anyone asked. She's been running interference for him, Nate. She's not just lying. She's actively covering for him." I closed my eyes, the weight of Derek's words sinking in. This was it. The leverage I needed. The proof that Rachel wasn't just a victim in this mess. She was a co-conspirator. "Send me the file," I said. "Already did," Derek replied. "Check your email." I hung up and opened my laptop, my hands shaking as I clicked on the email. The audio file was grainy, but Jake's voice was unmistakable. "Rachel said to keep my head down for a bit. She doesn't want me making things worse. She even helped me figure out what to say if anyone asks. Honestly, I don't know why she's so stressed. Her husband's such a pushover. He'll probably just roll over and take it." My blood boiled as I listened to his smug voice, but beneath the anger, there was a flicker of something else. Hope. Rachel thought she had me cornered. She thought she could control the narrative, twist the story, and come out of this looking like the victim. But now I had something she couldn't spin, and I wasn't going to waste it. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. The audio file was still fresh in my mind, Jake's arrogant words echoing in my ears. Her husband's such a pushover. He'll probably just roll over and take it. Not this time. Rachel had spent weeks spinning her web, carefully building a narrative where she was the victim and I was the villain. But the thing about liars? They always slip up eventually. And now I had proof. Not just of her lies, but of her willingness to work with Jake to manipulate everyone around us. This was my moment to turn the tables. I spent the morning meticulously organizing everything I had. The screenshot of Rachel's text with Jake, the audio file Derek had sent me, and even the texts Rachel had sent to Claire about me being unstable. Jennifer had told me to document everything, and now I had the kind of arsenal that could blow Rachel's entire narrative to pieces. But I wasn't going to play this in private. No, Rachel had dragged our lives into the public eye by turning friends and family against me. She'd wanted an audience for her story. Now she was going to get one for mine. I waited until late afternoon to make my move. Rachel was in the living room, curled up on the couch with her laptop, scrolling through Instagram like she didn't have a care in the world. The sight of her sitting there, so calm and composed, made my skin crawl. "Rachel," I said, stepping into the room. She looked up, her expression carefully neutral. "What?" "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. She sighed, closing her laptop. "Are we really doing this again? I thought we'd moved past the whole dramatic confrontation thing." "No," I said firmly. "You thought you'd gotten away with it. There's a difference." Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't respond. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. "I have something you need to hear." Rachel's confidence faltered for just a moment. "What are you talking about?" I hit play. Jake's voice filled the room, tinny but unmistakable. "Rachel said to keep my head down for a bit. She doesn't want me making things worse. She even helped me figure out what to say if anyone asks. Honestly, I don't know why she's so stressed. Her husband's such a pushover. He'll probably just roll over and take it." Rachel's face drained of color. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. Where did you get that?" she stammered. I didn't answer. I just stared at her, waiting for the mask to crack. "That doesn't mean anything," she said quickly, her voice rising. "It's just Jake being an idiot. You know how he talks. He's always making stuff up." "Oh, I'm sure," I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. "Except this lines up perfectly with the screenshot of your texts to him. You know, the ones where you told him you'd let him know when it was safe to meet up? The ones where you called me suspicious and told him to be patient." Her jaw tightened, and I could see the wheels turning in her head as she tried to find a way out. "Nate, this is ridiculous. You're blowing things way out of proportion." "Stop," I said sharply, cutting her off. "Just stop. I'm done listening to your lies, Rachel. You've spent weeks trying to make me look like the bad guy, telling our friends I'm unstable, dangerous, controlling. And now I have proof that not only were you cheating, but you were actively working with Jake to cover it up. Do you have any idea how pathetic that makes you look?" She stood up, her hands clenched into fists. "You don't know what you're talking about," she spat. "You don't know how hard it's been for me. Don't—" I snapped, my voice like ice. "Don't you dare try to turn this around again. I'm not falling for it anymore. You made your choices, Rachel, and now you're going to face the consequences." Her eyes flickered with something. Panic, maybe, or desperation. "What do you want, Nate? You want me to grovel? To apologize? Fine. I'm sorry. Okay? I messed up. I made a mistake. But we've been together for 10 years. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Don't you think we can fix this?" "Fix this?" I repeated, laughing bitterly. "You don't want to fix anything, Rachel. You just want to win. That's all this has ever been to you. A game. But guess what? You lost." She stared at me, her expression shifting from desperation to cold, simmering rage. "You think you're so righteous," she said quietly. "So perfect. But you're no better than me, Nate. You're just a coward hiding behind your little recordings and screenshots. You don't have the guts to fight me for real." "Oh, I'm fighting," I said, stepping closer. But I'm not going to do it your way. Sneaking around, lying to everyone, playing the victim. I'm going to fight with the truth. And when this is over, everyone is going to know exactly who you are. She didn't respond. She just stood there, her jaw clenched, her hands shaking. For the first time, I could see that she knew she'd lost control. The fallout began the moment I started sending the evidence to the people who needed to see it. Claire was the first. I forwarded her the audio file and the screenshot, along with a simple message. This is who Rachel really is. Believe what you want. Her response came within minutes. Nate, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Please let me know if there's anything I can do. Next, I sent the evidence to a few other mutual friends who'd been giving me the cold shoulder since Rachel started her smear campaign. The reactions were all the same: shock, apologies, and, most importantly, support. By the end of the day, Rachel's carefully crafted narrative had started to collapse. The friends she'd manipulated were turning against her. The lies she'd spun were unraveling, and the image she'd worked so hard to maintain was falling apart piece by piece. But the real moment of satisfaction came that evening, when Rachel stormed into the guest room, her face twisted with fury. "You're a bastard, you know that?" she hissed. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "And you're a liar, so I guess we're even." She glared at me, her hands trembling. "You think this is over? You think you've won? You don't know what I'm capable of, Nate." "No, Rachel," I said, standing up and meeting her gaze. "You don't know what I'm capable of. And now, you never will." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. She just turned and walked out of the room, slamming the door behind her. As the sound of her footsteps faded, I sat back down, the weight of everything finally starting to lift. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. Rachel had underestimated me. She thought she could lie, manipulate, and control her way to victory. But in the end, the truth won. And so did I.